Can you imagine sitting at a dinner table, surrounded by the very people who are supposed to love and support you, only to have them openly mock and belittle you? It's a feeling I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy, but it was my reality just a few short months ago. They laughed, they sneered, and they thought they were getting away with it. But what they didn't know was that their cruel words would be the catalyst for their own downfall. I mean, seriously, was I wrong for what I did next? Tell me honestly, would you have done the same thing if your own family had pushed you to the brink? Let me take you back to where it all began. My name is Alex, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the black sheep of my family. Not in a rebellious leather jacket-wearing, motorcycle riding kind of way, but in a quiet, studious, and frankly ambitious way that they just couldn't seem to grasp or, more accurately, tolerate. My family, you see, comes from a long line of what you might politely call comfortably stagnant individuals. My parents, Robert and Susan, both inherited decent sums from their own parents, enough to live a life free of genuine financial worry, but not enough to inspire any real drive. They had nice houses, luxury cars, and annual vacations, all without ever really breaking a sweat. My older brother, Mark, was cut from the same cloth. He flitted from one passion project to another, none of which ever really took off, but he always had Dad's credit card to fall back on. My sister, Sarah, was the same, convinced she was a burgeoning artist, despite her canvases collecting more dust than paint. I, on the other hand, was always fascinated by business, by creating something from nothing, by the thrill of the hustle. From a young age, while they were spending their allowances on video games and designer clothes, I was saving every penny buying books on entrepreneurship and trying my hand at small ventures, lemonade stands, selling refurbished electronics, even a brief, disastrous foray into personalized pet rocks. They found it amusing, a cute little quirk of mine. "Oh, look at little Alex, playing at being a businessman," they'd say with a patronizing chuckle. It stung even then, but I brushed it off. I was determined to prove them wrong. After graduating high school, while Mark and Sarah went to expensive art schools and liberal arts colleges that they barely attended, I worked 2 jobs to pay for a community college business program, then transferred to a state university on a partial scholarship. My family barely acknowledged my academic achievements. When I called home to tell them I'd made the dean's list, my mom just said, "That's nice, dear. Your brother just bought a new drum set." It was always like that. My accomplishments were minimized, my struggles ignored. I knew I couldn't rely on them for financial support, and frankly, I didn't want to. Their money felt tainted, in a way, by their apathy. After university, I landed an entry-level job at a tech startup. It wasn't glamorous, but I was learning, growing, and putting in 80-hour days. While they were lounging by the pool or taking European holidays, I was hunched over a laptop, fueled by instant coffee and a burning desire to succeed. Slowly but surely, I started to climb the ladder. I made smart investments, saved aggressively, and learned everything I could about the industry. The startup grew exponentially, and I grew with it. Fast forward 10 years. I was no longer the quiet, overlooked Alex. I was a senior executive with a significant stake in a multi-billion-dollar company. My investments had paid off handsomely. I owned a beautiful home, drove a nice car, and lived a very comfortable life, all on my own terms. My family, however, was still stuck in their comfortable stagnation. Only now, their inherited wealth was starting to dwindle. My parents had made a series of poor investments, encouraged by dodgy financial advisors, and Mark and Sarah had blown through most of their inheritances with their endless passion projects and extravagant lifestyles. They were starting to feel the pinch, though they'd never admit it. They still maintained the facade of wealth, but the cracks were beginning to show. I, on the other hand, had kept my success relatively quiet. I wasn't trying to hide it, but I also wasn't flaunting it. I still dressed modestly, drove a reliable but not flashy car, and generally avoided drawing attention to my financial standing. I suppose a part of me was still hoping for their approval, for them to see my hard work and finally acknowledge it. And then came the dinner. It was my parents' 40th wedding anniversary. They insisted on a big celebration at an exclusive restaurant. I knew they were probably dipping into their diminishing capital for it, but I played along. I bought them a thoughtful gift and arrived expecting a polite, if somewhat awkward, evening. The conversation, as it always did, revolved around my siblings' latest endeavors: Mark's revolutionary, a new cryptocurrency idea, which was clearly a scam, and Sarah's groundbreaking abstract art installation, which looked like a pile of discarded junk. When the topic finally, reluctantly, turned to me, it wasn't to ask about my work or my life. It was to mock me. My dad, after a few too many glasses of expensive wine, leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. "So, Alex," he slurred, still toiling away at that little tech company, "haven't you gotten tired of being a drone yet? We thought you'd have figured out a way to make real money by now, like your brother and sister." Mark snickered. "Yeah, Alex, when are you going to stop being so sensible? Where's the fun in working so hard?" Sarah chimed in, "Honestly, Alex, your life sounds so boring. All work and no play. You should really try to loosen up, enjoy life, like us." My mom just sat there, sipping her wine, a faint smile on her face, silently endorsing their cruelty. It wasn't just the words, it was the tone, the derision, the utter lack of respect. It was as if all my years of dedication, all my sacrifices, all my successes, meant absolutely nothing to them. They saw me as a failure, a boring, uninspired drone, simply because I hadn't chosen their path of inherited complacency. The restaurant was fancy, filled with hushed conversations and the clinking of silverware, but in that moment their laughter felt like a roar in my ears. Something snapped inside me. All the years of being overlooked, of being ridiculed, of being treated as less than, welled up. I felt a cold, hard anger settle in my chest, replacing the familiar ache of disappointment. My polite smile faltered, replaced by a steely gaze. I took a deep breath, trying to compose myself, to keep my voice even. But inside, a storm was brewing. I looked at my parents, at my siblings, their faces alight with their cruel amusement, and I realized something profound. They didn't deserve my respect, my kindness, or my help. They had built their entire identity on the shaky foundation of inherited wealth and a misguided sense of superiority, all while actively tearing down anyone who dared to be different. And that's when the idea, a truly magnificent and terrifying idea, began to form in my mind. So, that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice. Here I was, financially secure beyond their wildest dreams, and yet they still treated me like the awkward, unsuccessful younger brother. The bitterness, the years of slights, the open mockery at that dinner table, it all converged into one overwhelming feeling. I was done. Done with trying to earn their approval, done with hoping they'd see my worth. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have just walked away and cut them out of your life? Or would you have found a way to make them understand the consequences of their actions? I didn't say anything at that dinner. I simply nodded, forced a weak smile, and excused myself shortly after, feigning a sudden work emergency. The next day, however, was a different story. I spent the entire weekend meticulously planning. I wasn't just going to cut them off. I was going to show them exactly what they had so carelessly dismissed. The first step was to discreetly gather information. My parents, despite their supposed financial savvy, were incredibly careless. I knew their banks, their investment firms, even some of the names of their financial advisors. It wasn't hard to find publicly available information about their properties and assets. It quickly became clear that their comfortably stagnant lifestyle had come at a cost. Their inherited wealth was tied up in several properties, some of which were underperforming, and their liquid assets were dangerously low. My brother, Mark, had a failing online business venture which was hemorrhaging money, and Sarah had accumulated significant debt from her artistic lifestyle. They were all teetering on the edge, clinging to the illusion of wealth. This is where my business acumen came into play, but this time not for profit, but for strategic dismantling. My company was looking to expand its real estate portfolio. I subtly directed our acquisitions team to look into some properties in the area. Among these properties were two that my parents owned, a vacation home they rarely used, and a commercial building they rented out, which was their primary source of passive income outside of dwindling dividends. The timing was impeccable, the market was hot, and these properties, while not prime, were attractive for strategic reasons. I ensured that the offers were generous, even above market value, but structured in a way that required a quick sale. My parents, desperate for cash to prop up their failing lifestyle and avoid dipping further into their investments, jumped at the chance. They saw it as a windfall, a miracle. They even called me, bragging about their clever real estate dealings. I feigned congratulations, my voice betraying no hint of the cold satisfaction I felt. They had no idea I was the silent hand pulling the strings, the unseen force orchestrating their sudden good fortune. With the sale of those properties, a significant portion of their family's wealth was converted into cash. This was crucial for the next phase. Now, Mark and Sarah, Mark's cryptocurrency venture, was a classic pump and dump scheme in the making, and it was attracting a lot of naive investors, including some of my parents' acquaintances. I had a contact in financial regulation. An anonymous tip, detailed and irrefutable, was all it took. Within weeks, Mark's entire operation was shut down, his assets frozen, and he was facing legal action for fraud. He was ruined completely. The irony was, he was so consumed by his own self-importance, he never even considered that someone close to him might have been responsible. He just blamed government overreach and the system. Sarah's situation was different. Her art was genuinely terrible, and she owed a lot of money to various galleries and suppliers for materials and exhibition spaces that yielded no sales. I quietly bought up her outstanding debts through shell companies. Then, I had my lawyers send her official letters demanding immediate payment. She had no assets, no income, and nowhere to turn. Her artistic dreams and the financial recklessness that fueled them came crashing down. The final blow, and perhaps the most satisfying, involved their remaining assets. My parents had a trust, set up by my grandparents, which included a clause that allowed for its restructuring under specific financial distress conditions, provided all direct heirs agreed. This was the masterstroke. I had spent years studying their family's convoluted financial history. With their liquid assets depleted from the property sales and their children in dire financial straits, they were undeniably in distress. I presented them with a solution, a way to save face and prevent their complete financial ruin. I proposed a restructuring of the trust, which, on paper, appeared to consolidate their remaining wealth and provide a modest but stable annuity for their retirement. What they didn't realize was that the new terms, subtly embedded within complex legal jargon, essentially transferred controlling interest and significant beneficiaries to a new, anonymously owned holding company. That holding company was mine. They signed it, desperate, relieved, and completely oblivious. They thought I was helping them out of the goodness of my heart. They thanked me profusely for being the only sensible one in the family. The irony was so thick, I could taste it. In the weeks and months that followed, their world slowly unraveled. Mark was deep in legal trouble, his grand schemes exposed. Sarah was hounded by debt collectors, her artistic career a distant, expensive memory. My parents found their annuity barely covered their basic expenses, let alone their lavish lifestyle. They had to sell their big house, move into a much smaller one, and give up their luxury cars. They talked about how unlucky they were, how fate had conspired against them. They never, for 1 second, suspected the quiet, boring Alex. I was there, offering sympathy, listening to their complaints, watching their once proud facades crumble. I never rubbed it in, never hinted at my involvement. I just let them stew in the consequences of their own choices and the seeds of my carefully planted revenge. They had mocked my ambition, my hard work, my desire to build something meaningful. They had dismissed my entire existence as boring and sensible. And in return, I had quietly, meticulously, and legally taken everything from them. The feeling wasn't triumph, not exactly. It was a deep, quiet satisfaction, a justice that, to me, felt entirely deserved. So, that's how it all played out. They had their laughs at my expense, and I had the last one. My family is still struggling, and they still don't know why. They complain about their luck, their bad investments, the unfairness of it all. I, on the other hand, am thriving. My company is doing better than ever, and I continue to build my life, free from their toxic influence and their belittling remarks. The moral of the story, I suppose, is to never underestimate the quiet ones, the ones who are working hard behind the scenes. And perhaps, don't mock someone just because their path is different from yours, especially if that someone holds the keys to your entire financial existence. If you were on my side, if you think they got what they deserved, please like this video. Subscribe for more stories like this, and tell me your final thoughts on this whole messy situation in the comments section below. I'll see you all in the next story.